1/10 scale CJ crawler build. As you can see, it looks a little different than the last time from the last video. A couple of things you'll notice, I started on the body work. If you notice right here, this side still has the stock Wrangler flares made out of the hard ABS plastic front and back, and still has the Wrangler wheel arch in the rear. And I've cut off the side skirt here, the big stock bulky side skirt that used to be on there, and I've added on a little strip of styrene across the bottom, and I'm still doing the body work there. I'll flip it around and show you the other side so that you can see I've done more progress on that side. You can see I have the CJ hood and grill installed, and I have the fenders in the front trimmed up, and it looks very, very nice with the headlight buckets in there. It actually looks like it's supposed to. There's a lot of body work left to go. As you can see, when I was removing the stock Wrangler hood, I left some scratches in there, so I'll have to fill that in. I smoothed out the pieces on the side here. There were some little extra plastic things, I guess, for an antenna mount. Smoothed all that out, and it's coming along nicely. So you can see from this side I've done a lot more work than I've done on the other side. This side I've removed the Wrangler flares, front and rear, trimmed them all the way back down. And then I cut off the side skirt on this side, and I've added the strip of styrene to finish out the body work and make it nice and smooth. And I've done a lot more work on this side to make it look stock in appearance and have it all smoothed out. I actually re-radiused the rear fender opening to fit the stock CJ flare, which I've added there, and I think it actually looks very, very nice. The body is still sitting a little bit too far forward. The wheel arch isn't quite lined up, so I have to work on that. The body's just sitting on there right now. And then in the front here, I still have a little bit of work to do here and have the front flare installed, which is something I wanted to show you. Now that I've got it all cut off and removed, when you put the aftermarket flare up on here, you notice it's actually much too short. So what I'm probably going to have to do is cut it here, bring the front part of the flare forward, and I'll have to rebuild in this section with the spare parts that I got from Italy. There was a couple extra flares in there, so I'll have to cut one and section it and move it forward, which is not a big deal, but it's just more work. But as you can see, the body work on this side is coming a lot further. I've got this all smoothed out, and this side looks pretty good. So the next step that I have to make a big decision on, which I've been wrestling with for a long time, is whether or not I'm going to remove the top, which I've pretty much already decided that I'm going to do it. I just haven't had the mental ability to get in there and cut it open yet. I'm very afraid that once that top comes off, the whole body is going to get very flimsy and start falling apart, and all my measurements won't be true. So I'm trying to get all of the body work on the fenders and flares and the hood and the grill all installed before I cut the top off and get everything glued in place, so that there's enough of a structure in there to keep this thing from going all cattywampus on me. And then the other decision is, if I'm going to remove the hard top and run it with no top at all, am I going to take the doors out? And I pretty much decided I'm going to do that as well. So there's going to be a lot of cutting along this seam, and I'll have to do something with the hinges here so that it looks good. And then I'm also concerned about the windshield frame being real flimsy after I cut that all apart. But it was a decision that I made to make sure that the inside of it looks as detailed as the outside, and if I'm going to go to that amount of trouble and spend the time and effort to make the inside look so good, why would I want to hide it under the hard top? So I'm pretty much decided I've got to cut that all apart. I'm just afraid to do it right now. Alright, so you can see here in the rear, I've removed those weird little bumperette standouts that were on here. I cut those completely off, and I've grafted in a little section of styrene and used the putty to fill it back in and smooth it out, and did some body work on that. So now I've got the rear corners looking as smooth as they should on a CJ-7. I've cut out the stock Wrangler tailgate, and I've swapped in the CJ tailgate with the Jeep logo. It fits very, very well, and another decision I'm going to have to make is whether I just glue it in or whether I'm going to actually make it fold down on hinges. I don't know of a situation where I would need to have it fold down, or a situation where I would want to have it down, but that's just kind of a cool extra feature to have. But I'm afraid, once again, that once the top comes off and I remove all of this here, that there won't be enough structure to keep that body intact. So I'll probably end up just gluing that solid, and it'll just look like it works instead of having it open. And then, as you can see, there's a lot of detail in here where there's little ridges, and I'm going to have to smooth all that out before I paint it so that the lines from the molds don't come through. Alright, so this is the body tub. This is the Lexan floor piece that goes in. I've painted it and trimmed up the sides. This had a lot of extra flashing material around the edges, so I've got it all nice and trimmed up now so that when it sits up in there, you don't see any extra pieces hanging down on any sides. It's about as thin as I can possibly get it, but still leaves enough of a tab to glue onto the sides. I haven't decided if this is going to be a snap-in piece that holds in place somehow, or if I'm actually just going to glue it in there. But once it's all glued in, it becomes very permanent, so I haven't decided if I'm going to do that or not. I figured I would show you the next little goodie that I ordered, which is the racing seats. These were actually on clearance because they were blue, and I got a set of them for under 10 bucks with the shipping included, and these were just a clearance item, but I thought that they looked pretty cool. The blue is not the same color that I'm going to choose for the exterior of the Jeep, but I couldn't pass up buying 2 racing seats for a pretty good deal, and I can always repaint them later if I want to make them black or whatever, but they actually look pretty good, and the scale is perfectly correct, so I'll be able to fit the interior. And then I was also playing with the center console that was provided from Italy, along with the extra bonus parts that I got. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was my color choice. Here is the stock hood that I cut off. This is the Wrangler grill. And I did a little test paint on here just to see what the color would look like. I used the thin primer, and then I just shot some of the color on there. It's only one coat, and I didn't do any sanding underneath it, but I just did a little color test to see. I don't know if you can tell on the video, but it's a very sparkly, deep blue color. It's a little bit dark when it's inside, but when it's outside it looks very, very nice. And I think that that's the color I'm going to use, so that'll be my my color test, and I'll look at that for a few days and decide if that's the color I'm going to keep or if I'm going to go with something different. Alright, the last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is the ride height. I've been playing with this for a long time, and I've been trying to decide what the proper lift, I guess you could say, would be for this particular setup. The shocks that I purchased for this were the 100mm white shocks. They have no dampening in them. It's just a spring shock that I bought from RC 4-wheel drive. I thought the 100mm would be the right length to give me the lift that I needed. But when I had them on here with the springs inside, it was actually way, way too tall. So I played around with moving the shock mounts. I even looked at different ways. I know they have some shock mount adjusters that are bolt-on that'll give you more droop or more height if you need to. But what I ended up doing was taking the springs apart, and I removed the springs completely. So right now the shocks are in place with no spring inside, and they're bottomed completely out, and that's the ride height that you see right there. It has no spring in it whatsoever. So I'm probably either going to need to go back and order a shorter spring, either the 80mm or maybe even a shorter shock setup. Or what I'll do is end up cutting down the coils inside and putting them back into these springs just to give it enough so that it has a little bit of a ride, but it's not going to get very much suspension at all. But I'm trying to go for a more scale appearance than a more off-road, more aggressive appearance. So it really doesn't matter to me how much spring is in the shock, as long as it'll allow for the little bit of travel that I need to make it look realistic. So I won't know that until I get all the stuff put in here and get it up to its final weight and take it out and test it a little bit. I am noticing that it's getting very, very heavy now. When it first started out, it was pretty light, and I was worried that it wouldn't have enough weight to compress the springs. The springs are pretty stout. But now with these extra body parts, with the hood and the front grille, it's actually a very thick material, and there's some kind of steel mesh inside there to give it strength. It actually adds a lot of weight to the front. Combine that with the axles and the solid aluminum wheels, the tires and the frame, this thing is actually starting to get a pretty good weight to it. So hopefully once I get the motor installed and the transmission, transfer case, and all the electronics, it'll weigh enough to compress those springs down, and then I'll be able to put them back in and adjust for the final ride height. But I definitely don't want to cut them until I know for sure. Well, that's all I have for now. I'll catch up with you next time. Thanks for watching.